A breed of forest spirit only recently emerged into the ranks of the Sylvaneth. The Gossamid Archers are afforded the power of flight by the severing spikes that clasp their torsos. With impressive speed and mobility, the archers fly to wherever they're needed on the battlefield, swooping low to shoot at the enemy and invading counter-assault with a swarm of insectile distractions. A gruesome fate awaits any struck by the shaft fired by these symbiotic skirmishers. The arrowheads contain voracious grubs that devour the target from within. Welcome to How to Paint a Gossamid Archer Champion. I've already assembled the miniature and removed mold lines, so the next step is to add an undercoat. I will be using several contrast paint in this video, so my go-to spray for this miniature is Wraithbone. I'll be back once the undercoat is dry. Let's paint a Gossamid Archer. The undercoat is dry and we are ready to paint. Now we are inevitably going to get some paint onto places where it doesn't belong, so it's a good idea to have some Wraithbone at hand. The first thing I'm going to paint is this little rock stone thing beneath the tree sapling. The reason for this is because I'm going to use a dry brush later on. So the paint I'm going to use is Stormvermin Fur, and I'm adding a base coat. Just apply it all over the stone, in several layers if you need to. Following that, I'll add a shade of Nuln Oil to add a little definition. And finally, add a dry brush of Longbeard Grey. This is why it's handy to keep some Wraithbone at hand. We are going to hit the tree sapling. The next part is to paint a major feature of this miniature, and that is the tree and the bark. I'm using wildwood for this, and I'll dilute it with some water. I'll add a thin coat all over, and if you want the color to be stronger, add a second coat. That's entirely up to you. I went for a single coat and I think it looks good actually. I went a little heavier on the recesses though. Next I'll add a dry brush of Gorthor Brown all over the wood. Just be careful not to hit the rock we painted earlier. When the dry brushing is complete, I'll add another highlight, this time with Baneblade Brown, but I'm not going to dry brush it on, I'm going to add it much more focused. I'm going to paint it on the raised areas, and there are plenty to go around. Just like here for example. I'm using the side of my brush to catch the raised areas. Do this all over the wood. The tree has been highlighted and I'll consider it complete. I've also done my best to remove any mistakes I've made with Wraithbone. Next is time to paint the spirit parts, and that is the skin and his bow and arrows. For this I'm using a mix of Imperial Fist and Contrast Medium in about 1-to-1 mix. I've added the colors to my palette and now I'll bring it together like this. This is the strength I'm looking for. Next, just carefully apply it all over the skin and bow and arrows, and be careful not to hit the wood. Following that, I'll take the exact same mix and paint another layer, but this time in a much more controlled fashion. So I'm grabbing a smaller brush and painting this directly onto the recesses. For example, here. This is to add some more, well, contrast. I'm also painting the inside of his mouth and eyes. When the contrast paint is dry, you can see we have some really nice contrast and definition, such as the muscles. Next, I'll add my first highlight. I'm using Phalanx Yellow. Following that, I'll add a second highlight, this time using Dawn Yellow. I'm only painting the most extreme raised areas. The next step is to add an eerie glow to the bow and arrows and his hair. And for this I'm going back to my mix of Imperial Fist and Contrast Medium, but I'm also adding in some Ball Red to the mix. Once again I'm using a 1:1 ratio of Imperial Fist and Contrast Medium. I'll bring them together and make my mix once again. This is the strength I'm looking for. Next I add a little Ball Red next to the mix. And well, mix them together. Now we got this rich orangey looking paint. Next, apply it over the weapons and the hair. And with that, we are ready to move on to the next step. Now, I did a couple of things behind the scenes. I painted Wraithbone over every leaf on the miniature. And I also painted this shield feature in Wildwood. So, next I'm going to take my Ball Red and mix it with some Contrast Medium at a 1:1 ratio. I'll mix it together on my palette to get a diluted version of the paint. Following that, I'll paint every leaf and the loincloth on this miniature. I'll even take the paint a little down the branches to make them blend together. Following that, I'll add a highlight of Fire Dragon Bright to the same features. Following that, I'll add an edge highlight of Sylvaneth orange. And with that, the flower petals and the loincloth is complete. Now I've decided I want to do the same thing with the joint behind the knee. I'll paint it in Wraithbone and then I'll use Boar Red and then highlight it the same way we just did. Next up is the rune and the seed in his belly. I'm going to start by painting it with the white scar. Use a small brush for this. I'll paint it directly into the recesses of this rune. And I'll do the same thing with the seed. Following that, I'm going back to my mix of Boar Red. I'm painting it once again directly into the recesses, but I'm also going to paint it around the recesses to give an appearance of a glow, a red glow. The same with the seed. The more layers you apply, the stronger the color will be. Next up, I would like to paint this Quiver Bug on his backside. I'm starting with the base coat of Avalanche Sunset. I've already applied some to my palette and I thinned it down with some water. Just apply this color all over. It may take a couple of layers. And do be careful not to hit any parts you've already painted. The bug has been base coated, so now we're ready to add a couple of shades. And I'm starting with Cassandra Yellow all over. Once again, do be careful not to hit any of the other parts. I've given the shade plenty of time to dry, so next I'll add a shade of Fugan Orange, but this time only to the stinger. When the Fugan Orange is dry, it's time to gently, very gently add a dry brush of Astorath Red all over the bug. And do be careful not to hit the skin or the tree. After that dry brush, the little bug is complete. Now it's time to move on to the big bug, and I'm using a contrast paint, Gore Grunter Fur, and I'm adding it all over. I've finished applying the contrast paint. It has given it an almost bronze look. As you can see, I have hit the wings several places, but don't worry, we'll fix it with the Wraithbone later. Next I'm going to add a layer of Bestigor flesh. I have thinned this down quite a lot, almost to transparency. paint this on and avoid all the recesses. I finished applying the Bestigal flesh, so now I'm going to add a highlight of Cadian flesh tone. Just at the most raised areas and the most sharp edges. And lastly, I'll add a highlight of Kislev flesh to the most extreme edges. I have cleaned up the eyes of both bugs, so now I'm going to add a layer of Magmadroth Flame. I've mixed this together with some contrast medium at a 1:1 ratio. Just gently apply it over the eyes. The contrast paint is dry, so now I'll add an edge highlight of Loganath Orange. And with that, the eyes are complete. Next, I'm going to paint all the silver on this model, and that includes the piece of jewelry hanging from his loincloth and the crown he's wearing. I'm using a base coat of Lead Belger. With that base coat dry, I'll gently, very gently, add some Quelia green shade. And finally add an edge highlight of Stormhost Silver. I am primarily using the side of my brush here to catch the raised areas. And with that, the silver is complete. Now we're done using metallics, so I recommend changing your paint water at this stage. Now it's time to paint those wings. I've did my best trying to correct any mistakes on the wings with some Wraithbone. Now we're going back to Magmadroth Flame and mixing it up with some contrast medium, this time in a 2:1 ratio. So I'm taking 2 drops of Magmadroth Flame and 4 drops of contrast medium. Next, I'll take the medium into a little bit of the Magmadroth Flame and mix it well together. You can see now it's been very diluted. So the first step is quite easy. Just apply this mix all over the wings. So what I'm aiming for is a gradient where the color is strongest at the top and weaker at the bottom. So using the exact same mix, I'll get some paint on my brush and add it to the wing once again. However, this time I'm starting at the top and only going halfway down. And then I quickly wash my brush, make sure it's damp, and then blend it in. So it doesn't have a sharp edge. The trick is to do this several times. The more times you do it, the stronger the color will be and the bigger the gradient will be. So do this on all the wings as many times as you want. I ended up using 5 layers. You can even take it further if you want to, or maybe even less if you don't like the strong color difference. I did say before that we were done using metallics. I was wrong. There is this little gemstone in his loincloth. I'm going to base coat that with Stormhost Silver. The gemstone is visible from both sides, so remember to paint both sides. When the base coat is dry, I'll add a layer of soulstone blue. You might need 2 layers for this. And finally, straight from the pot, I'm going to add a little dot of white scar. Just like that. If you want to take the wings a step further, you can paint the veins with the Sylvaneth orange. I'm not going to do that, but you can if you will. The miniature is complete and now it's time to do the base. Of course, you should do the base however you want, so it matches with the rest of your army. But I'm going to start with adding some stone and mud. Following that, I'll add an all-over shade of Agrath Earthshade. Give it plenty of time to dry. I'd say about 20 minutes. Next, I'll add a highlight by dry brushing on some Tyrant Skull. Next I'll add some tufts and some red flowers and yellow flowers. I'll be using a little PVA glue for this. And with that applied, there's only one thing left to do, and that is to paint the rim of the base. You can paint this however you like, but I'm going with Abaddon Black. And just like that, the miniature is complete. Just remember to add some varnish if you plan to play games with your miniature. The techniques I've shown in this video can be used with any colors you want. This is just an example of one way to paint a Gossamid Archer, using primarily contrast paints. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please leave a like and hit the subscribe button. If you want to get notified about my uploads, then hit the bell icon as well. If you are following along at home, then please share your work on Instagram with the hashtag #JimmyStender, and I'll be sure to check out your work. Until next time, my dear viewer, happy painting.